My name is Santiago Mejia. I teach business ethics in the Gabrieli School of Business. So I want to talk about a couple of papers that I published in Business Ethics Quarterly, which is the top journal on business ethics, where I examine the ethical obligations that managers have to third parties in virtue of the fact that they are acting on behalf of shareholders. One of the foundational questions in business and in business ethics is what is the purpose of the corporation? And for a number of years, there's been like two main sides, if you want. There's some scholars, and those are particularly prominent in business ethics, who argue that the corporation should serve the interest of a variety of stakeholders. And then there's a more traditional account, is particularly grounded on economic theory and legal scholarship, which argues that the company or the corporation's aim is to satisfy the interest of shareholders. And the debate is framed in such a way that the scholars who argue for stakeholder theory criticize a version of shareholder primacy that accurately reflects what many of the instances of shareholder primacy are in the real world, but not theoretically the best version that we can have. I'm trying to find what would be a good account of shareholder primacy, what would be the requirements from the ethical point of view for that account to be legitimate, but also how could we think about it in a way that is attractive and compelling. So one of the distinctive approaches in business ethics is that it's a normative approach, and therefore it's not trying to sort of identify what is actually happening in the world, but it's trying to identify what should happen in the world. And that's a very different than the research that typically happens in business schools. In a paper that I published in 2019 called Weeding Out Flawed Versions of Shareholder Primacy, I used a distinction between something I call non-elective obligations and elective obligations. My concern has been to identify what are the responsibilities that managers have to third parties in virtue of the fact that they're acting on behalf of shareholders. There's two possibilities. One account is a very minimalistic account where the obligations of ethical obligations of managers are as minimal as you can, just merely conform with the law. On the other side, there's people who think that because managers are acting on behalf of shareholders, all the obligations that shareholders have carry over to the managers. And I think both are mistaken. And here's like an important insight that Friedman had. If the corporation is going to do charity on behalf of shareholders, it will be much better to just give the money to shareholders and for them individually to do it on their own. When an obligation that shareholders have carry over to the manager is when all the shareholders in some way are tied together by the fact that they are shareholders of that company. So for instance, I have this example in one of my papers where there's this huge hurricane that devastated a particular island, and a company has really good logistical capacities in that island and could use its resources to distribute blood in a very efficient way. Now, even if that's not profit maximizing, even if that's not profitable, right? It's not a particular risk to shareholders and it's particularly costly, the company should do it. And this is one instance where I think the discussion has often been very poor, in that most moral obligations are considered in the model of charity and not just because you have this particular need that is addressed and your company is particularly well equipped to do it. And therefore, even though shareholder primacy is taken to be a pretty callous normative theory, if you think about it carefully, it is actually very demanding. And therefore, it puts shareholder primacy, when you understand it properly, very close to stakeholder theory. I think what's powerful is that the moral minimum, the starting point, from an ethical point of view, is much higher than where we take it to be. Because the questions I'm engaging are so foundational, they apply across the board to any industry. I hope my students get to see that even though in many cases doing good is good for the bottom line, there's some cases where even if it's not the case, you're still committed to the common good because it's the common good.